I never believed people when they said casinos had a strange atmosphere after midnight. I'd been to plenty of casinos over the years, mostly on weekend trips with friends, and they always felt the same to me. Loud, crowded, and impossible to escape without losing money. Laugh softly. Everything changed during a business trip to Las Vegas in the fall of 2022. After finishing a conference, I had one free evening before my flight home. Around 11:30 p.m., I wandered into one of the larger casinos on the Strip, mostly to look around. I wasn't much of a gambler, so I exchanged $100 for chips and figured I'd spend an hour playing blackjack before calling it a night. For the first 30 minutes, everything was normal. I lost a few hands, won a couple back, and eventually drifted toward the slot machines. That's when I met him. He looked to be in his late 60s, wearing a neatly pressed gray suit that looked far too expensive for someone sitting alone at a penny slot machine. He smiled as I walked past. "First time here?" he asked. I nodded. "Don't stay too late." He said it with a smile, almost like a joke. I laughed politely. "I'll probably be gone in an hour." He simply nodded and returned to staring at the machine in front of him. Something about him felt unusual, not threatening, just out of place. I continued walking. About 15 minutes later, I hit a decent jackpot on a slot machine. Nothing life-changing, just under $4,000. Excited laugh. The machine exploded with flashing lights and celebratory music. Several nearby players looked over. One casino employee congratulated me while explaining how to collect the payout. I was smiling the entire walk to the cashier. $4,000 wasn't enough to retire, but it was definitely enough to make my business trip memorable. After collecting the money, I decided that was my sign to leave. As I headed toward the exit, I noticed the same older man standing near one of the elevators. This time, he wasn't smiling. He quietly said, "They know." I frowned. "I'm sorry." He glanced toward the casino floor. "The people who watch winners." Before I could ask what he meant, the elevator doors opened. He stepped inside. The doors closed. I shrugged it off. Las Vegas attracts all kinds of interesting people. Nervous laugh. I walked outside into the warm desert air and started the 10-minute walk back to my hotel. The Strip was still busy, but the farther I walked, the quieter it became. About halfway back, I noticed someone behind me. A man wearing a black hoodie. Nothing unusual. People walked the Strip all night. Still, something made me glance back again a minute later. He was still there. Same distance, same pace. Maybe it was coincidence. I crossed the street. He crossed too. I slowed down. He slowed down, heart pounding. That's when I stopped pretending it was nothing. I ducked into a convenience store. The man kept walking. Relieved, I bought a bottle of water and waited a few minutes before stepping back outside. The sidewalk was empty. I smiled to myself. "See? You're just imagining things." I continued toward my hotel. Less than 2 blocks later, the same man was standing across the street, waiting. He wasn't pretending to look at his phone. He wasn't talking to anyone. He was simply watching me. Every instinct told me not to panic. I turned into the brightly lit entrance of another casino instead of continuing toward my hotel. Inside, the noise instantly returned. Slot machines chimed. People laughed. Everything felt safe again. I wandered through the gaming floor for nearly 20 minutes before deciding to leave through another exit. When I stepped outside, the man was already there, standing beneath a streetlight, looking directly at me. I immediately went back inside and approached a security officer. I explained that someone appeared to be following me. He listened carefully before asking for a description. Black hoodie, tall, late 30s, beard. The officer's expression changed. He asked me one question. "Did you win money tonight?" I hesitated. "Yeah." He sighed. "Stay here." 2 security guards walked me through employee hallways until we reached a secure exit where they called a taxi. Before I got inside, one of them quietly said, "You're not the first winner he's followed." I asked what he meant. The guard looked toward the parking garage. "He waits for people who leave alone after winning." I felt sick. As the taxi drove away, I looked out the rear window. The man was standing on the sidewalk, watching the cab disappear. I thought that was the end of it, until the next morning. I was checking out of my hotel when the front desk clerk handed me an envelope. There was no return address, she said. Inside, there was only one casino chip. No note, no explanation, just a single $1 chip. On the back, written in black marker, were 4 words. "You left too early," whispers. I asked the clerk who delivered it. She said the security cameras showed no one approaching the front desk. Someone had simply found the envelope sitting there when they opened that morning. I still have that chip locked in a drawer at home. I've been back to Las Vegas once since then, but I never gamble anymore. And whenever someone celebrates a big jackpot, I can't help but wonder who's watching from the other side of the casino floor. I spent almost 7 months working overnight security at a casino just outside Reno, Nevada. Before taking the job, I thought casino security was mostly about breaking up fights or catching people trying to cheat at the tables. The reality was a lot less exciting. Most nights were spent watching surveillance cameras, walking empty hallways, and checking locked doors. It was repetitive, and after a while, you stopped expecting anything unusual to happen. My shift started at midnight and ended at 8 in the morning. Around 3 o'clock, the casino would finally begin to quiet down. Most of the guests who planned to leave had already cashed out, and the remaining gamblers looked like they had completely lost track of time. That part of the night always felt different. The music seemed quieter, the lights somehow felt dimmer, and the building itself became almost eerily silent. About 2 weeks after I started, I noticed something strange. Every single night, at exactly 3:17 a.m., one of the surveillance cameras would lose its signal. It wasn't random. It wasn't occasional. It happened every night. The same camera. Camera 47. The outage lasted exactly 10 seconds before the picture returned like nothing had happened. The first few times, I assumed it was a technical issue. Cameras fail all the time, especially older ones. But after watching the exact same thing happen night after night, I mentioned it to my supervisor. He didn't even look surprised. He simply said, "Don't worry about camera 47. That answer bothered me more than the camera itself. Why wouldn't security care about a camera that failed every single night? A few evenings later, curiosity finally got the better of me. At 3:15, I left the surveillance room and walked toward the hallway camera 47 overlooked. It was an employee corridor connecting the loading dock to the surveillance office. No customers were ever allowed there. The hallway was completely empty. Bright fluorescent lights buzzed overhead. The air conditioning echoed softly through the vents. I checked my watch, 3:16. I stood beneath the camera and looked up at it. Everything seemed perfectly normal. Then the lights flickered. Once, twice, a third time. The hallway suddenly felt colder. Not slightly colder. The kind of cold that makes the hair on your arms stand up. I looked toward the surveillance office at the far end of the corridor. The heavy metal door slowly swung open. Nobody walked out. It just opened. I waited for several seconds, expecting another guard to step through. Nothing happened. I started walking back. Halfway down the hallway, I heard footsteps. They were slow, heavy, almost as if someone was dragging their feet across the floor behind me. I turned around immediately. The hallway was empty. Not a single person. I stood there listening. Silence. Trying to convince myself I was imagining things, I continued walking. The footsteps returned. This time they matched my pace perfectly. Every step I took, another step echoed behind me. I stopped. The footsteps stopped. I started walking again. So did they. My heartbeat started racing. I spun around. Still nothing. The hallway remained completely empty. At that point, I wasn't trying to investigate anymore. I just wanted to get back to the surveillance room. I picked up my pace. The footsteps became faster. I started jogging. The footsteps broke into a run. By the time I reached the surveillance office, I slammed the door shut behind me so hard the entire room shook. My supervisor looked up from the monitors. He didn't ask what happened. Instead, he quietly said, "You heard them." I stared at him. "What do you mean? Heard them?" He leaned back in his chair and stayed silent for a few moments before speaking. Years earlier, another overnight security guard had reported hearing footsteps in that exact hallway. He had radioed the surveillance room saying someone was following him. Then camera 47 lost signal. 10 seconds later, the picture returned. The hallway was empty. The guard was gone. Police searched every inch of the property. They checked maintenance rooms, loading docks, rooftops, even the surrounding parking lots. They never found him. No signs of a struggle. No evidence he had left the building. It was as if he had simply disappeared. I didn't know whether to believe him. Part of me assumed it was just another story older employees told new hires. Until the following week, the casino became unusually busy after a concert ended downtown. Several intoxicated guests started arguing near the poker tables, and almost every security officer was called downstairs. I stayed behind to monitor the cameras. At exactly 3:17, camera 47 went black, just like always. I watched the timer. 1 second, 2, 3. Then movement appeared on camera 46, the camera facing the opposite direction. Someone was standing beneath camera 47. A security guard. His back was turned toward the camera. I reached for my radio. "Who's in the employee hallway?" No response. I repeated the call. Nothing. The guard slowly turned around. I felt every muscle in my body freeze. He was wearing the exact same uniform I was, the same name badge, the same haircut, the same face. It was me. The figure smiled. It wasn't a normal smile. It stretched wider than it should have. Then camera 47 came back online. The hallway was empty. I immediately replayed the recording. Nothing. Camera 46 showed an empty hallway the entire time. No guard. No movement. No one. The footage completely contradicted what I had just watched live. I sat there staring at the monitor for several minutes, trying to convince myself I had imagined it. The next morning, I walked straight into my supervisor's office and handed him my resignation. He didn't try to stop me. He simply signed the paperwork. As I gathered my things, he looked at me and quietly said, "You're lucky." I asked him what he meant. He hesitated before answering. The last guy saw himself 3 times. I never asked what happened after the third. I didn't want to know. 6 months later, I drove past the casino while visiting Reno. I don't know why. Maybe I just wanted to prove to myself that everything I'd experienced had been the result of stress and exhaustion. As I waited at a traffic light across the street, I glanced toward the employee entrance. A security guard stepped outside. Even from that distance, I recognized him instantly. He looked exactly like me. He stood there for several seconds. Then he smiled. The light turned green. I drove away without looking back. Sometimes, usually around 3:17 in the morning, I wake up for no reason at all. The house is completely quiet, but every now and then, I hear slow footsteps outside my bedroom door. I never open it. I've never been much of a gambler. In fact, the only reason I ended up inside that casino was because my cousin wanted to celebrate his 21st birthday. There were 6 of us all together, and we drove about 3 hours to one of the larger casinos just outside Lake Tahoe. We checked into the hotel around 6 in the evening, grabbed dinner, and spent the next several hours wandering around the casino floor. It was loud, crowded, and exactly what you'd expect on a Saturday night. Around 1 in the morning, everyone decided to head upstairs except me. I wasn't tired yet. I told them I'd stay behind for another 30 minutes, maybe play a few slot machines, and then head back to the room. That decision is something I still regret. The casino looked completely different once the crowd started thinning out. During the evening, it had been filled with laughter, flashing lights, and people celebrating. Now it felt strangely empty. The slot machines continued making cheerful sounds, but there were only a handful of people scattered across the gaming floor. I exchanged $50 for chips and wandered over to a row of electronic blackjack tables. That's where I noticed her. She looked to be somewhere in her late 40s, wearing a dark blue dress and a white cardigan. Nothing about her appearance seemed unusual except for one thing. She never looked at the cards. She wasn't looking at the dealer. She wasn't even looking at the table. She was staring straight ahead as though she was watching someone standing on the opposite side of the room. I sat 2 seats away and started playing. After a few hands, I glanced over. She hadn't moved. Not once. A cocktail waitress walked over and asked if anyone wanted a drink. The woman didn't respond. The waitress frowned slightly before walking away. About 10 minutes later, I won a couple $100. Feeling pretty good about myself, I stood up and decided to cash out. As I walked away, I looked back toward the table. The woman was gone. I assumed she'd left while I wasn't paying attention. I didn't think much of it. The cashier was located near the center of the casino. While I waited in line, I noticed the same woman standing several feet ahead of me. That struck me as odd because I hadn't seen her leave the blackjack table. Maybe she'd taken a shortcut. When it became her turn at the counter, she simply stood there. The cashier smiled politely. "Can I help you?" No answer. The woman didn't move. After several awkward seconds, another employee walked over and gently asked if everything was okay. Still nothing. Then, without saying a word, she turned around and walked away. The cashier looked just as confused as I was. I collected my money and headed toward the elevators. As the elevator doors opened, I froze. The same woman was already standing inside. She hadn't pressed any buttons. She wasn't looking at anyone. She was facing the back wall of the elevator. I almost waited for the next one. Instead, I stepped inside anyway. There were 4 other people with us. Nobody spoke during the ride. The elevator reached the 7th floor. The doors opened. Everyone stepped out. Everyone except the woman. She never moved. As the doors closed behind me, I caught one last glimpse of her. She was still facing the back wall, completely motionless. I reached my room and laughed it off. Casinos attract strange people. Maybe she'd had too much to drink. Maybe she was dealing with something personal. I convinced myself there had to be a reasonable explanation. The next morning, we checked out and stopped at a small diner before driving home. While waiting for breakfast, my cousin started scrolling through reviews of the casino online. He suddenly looked up. "Hey, you remember that woman at the blackjack table?" I looked at him. "What about her?" He turned his phone toward me. "I thought you were joking last night." The article was from a local newspaper. It described an incident that had happened nearly 8 years earlier. A woman had suffered a fatal heart attack while playing blackjack inside that exact casino. Witnesses said she remained sitting at the table for several minutes before anyone realized something was wrong. The attached photograph made my stomach drop. It was her. The same blue dress, the same white cardigan, the same expression. I immediately grabbed my phone. I still had several pictures from the trip, mostly photos of my cousins near the slot machines. As I flipped through them, one image caught my attention. It had been taken around 12:45 in the morning. My cousin was smiling beside one of the gaming tables. Standing several feet behind him was the woman, perfectly clear, looking directly toward the camera. I zoomed in. Everyone else in the picture appeared slightly blurred from movement. She didn't. She looked unnaturally sharp, almost as though she'd been posing. I showed the photo to my cousins. None of them remembered seeing her. One of them insisted she hadn't been standing there at all. Trying to convince myself it was some strange coincidence, I emailed the casino and asked if they could review the surveillance footage from that night. A few days later, I actually received a response. The security manager thanked me for contacting them, but explained they couldn't share surveillance footage with guests. However, there was one sentence at the end of the email that I've never forgotten. It read, "Our surveillance department has no record of anyone matching the description you provided entering or leaving the gaming floor during the time you mentioned." I stared at that sentence for a long time. If she never entered, and she never left, then where did she come from? A few months later, curiosity got the better of me. I searched online until I found the obituary of the woman who had died. According to the article, she had visited the casino every Saturday night for almost 15 years. Blackjack had been her favorite game. Her family said she always believed her lucky streak was just one hand away. I've never gone back to that casino. Not because I think it's haunted. Not because I believe ghosts are wandering around the blackjack tables. But because every time I think about that night, I remember something I didn't notice until much later. In every single photo I took inside the casino, she wasn't looking at the cards. She wasn't looking at a dealer. She wasn't looking at anyone else. She was always looking directly at me.